Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. More AI is on the way. Welcome to State of the Art, the future of photography, how AI and computational photography are shaping our gear. For that, I'd like to welcome the wonderful duo, Cliff and Susan. What's going on, guys?
Hey, it's good to be back.
Yeah, thanks for having us again.
Good to have you guys back. You guys always have the cozy background that lets me know you're not here in the United States, or if you are, you're in a place way cooler than mine. So, where are we
We're
broadcasting
tuning in
from?
today from Norway.
Oh, nice.
Lofoten, Norway. Yeah.
I'm
So yes, we're in the attic of a lodge right now. Actually, it's their conference center, and yeah, good Wi-Fi. Happy to do this.
Yeah, we should do a
awesome.
whole behind the scenes. In fact, we do have a few images of all the kind of ridiculous, crazy places we've done these podcasts from, especially with you guys. There's a whole history of broadcasting locations that we've done with you. So we'll add this to the list, the attic of a lodge in the Arctic Circle in the wintertime.
I love it. I love it. Well, look, as I told you in the green room, a lot of great response after part one. So I'm going to step out of the way, let you guys do your thing, and remind everybody if you do have any questions, feel free to get them in the comments section. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in a bit for some Q&A.
Great.
Thank you so much for the lovely intro, Derek, as always. All right, let's gonna bring up our screen here. You guys should see presentation. Do you guys see that now? You guys see our screen?
I'm guessing that's a yes. So we are continuing our whole process of the state of the art AI and the future of the camera. So today we're going to be talking about the camera.
And the history of the camera. So we're gonna start off before we get into the future. We're gonna take a step back and we're gonna go back to the future. We're gonna do the briefest history in the history of the camera, right? So we'll do a very quick kind of background and intro to where this all started, because I think that will give us a pretty good context about where we are now, and then like the really fun stuff is where it's all headed.
And something new, we have a QR code. So to make it easier for you guys to stay up to date on all of the new things going on with AI and technology, scan our QR code and then you'll be entered into our secret community.
Yeah, not so secret community. Let's
Okay.
not make it a secret community. Let's make it a very public community. But this page just actually launched today. So depending on where you are in the world, that might populate either our newsletter sign up, or most likely by now it'll populate to our actually community page. So we built a whole website around the topics we're talking about now, topics we talked about previously, and topics we'll continue to talk about. And this will give everyone an opportunity to ask more questions. We can take this offline a little bit. We'll be doing we'll be posting slides from this, for instance. A lot of the content that we use to create, we'll be posting a lot of the reference material, a lot of the websites, a lot of the apps and techniques that we use. It's just a place that we can put everything, and a place that you guys can go to find it, and then and communicate with us and kind of stay in touch, and let's build this community. This isn't just about us kind of giving the information out and just, shouting from the mountaintops about this. We want to hear from you guys too. This is very much a community effort here, as we're all going through this as photographers, and we want to foster that and keep that going. So the future of dot photography, and if you just point your camera or point your phone at that QR code, it'll take you right there.
Awesome. So we're going to kick off, like we said, with going into the past and talking about the evolution of the camera. Ooh. So back in the 1600s, the camera obscura, which means dark room and line, was started, and it was a box-shaped device used as an aid for drawing. It was also referred to as a pinhole image, and it let light through in a small opening on one side. It projected the reversed and inverted image on the other. The principle of capturing an inverted image through a pinhole or a lens laid the groundwork for the development of the photographic camera for the 19th century.
Just take a look at the size of this camera too, right? And so we complain about the cameras that we have to carry around with us. We're gonna continue this. You'll see how this has evolved. So the first permanent photograph of a camera image was made in 1826 by Joseph Niepce, using a sliding wooden box camera, pewter coated, and it was basically on pewter coated with bitumen. It was just outside of his window. That's the first photograph. But imagine like the magic that must have been for the first time to record something and be able to take that and show it to others, right? If any one of us remembers the magic of what that felt like, the first picture we took, Imagine being the first person ever to do that. Like, that's crazy. So back in 1826, that was the first image that we had that could do this.
And the first permanent photo of a camera image was made.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
8 hours. I just put this as a second slide. Sorry. Yeah.
Just said this.
Wait, what's going on? 8 hours, the exposure time, right? Think about that. 8 hours. That was the first exposure. It took them 8 hours to do. Pretty wild.
All right, on to the next. In 1837, the daguerreotype was created by Louise Jacques Mende Daguerre. You know, my French isn't that good.
Daguerre.
Daguerre. He exposed on a plate coated with silver iodine and exposed this plate again to mercury vapor. In 1839, the world's first photographic camera was developed for commercial manufacturing, and the exposure time was now 5 to 30 minutes. So, hey, if you think about it, when you used to pose for a picture, maybe you'd be there for a day, 2 days, even a week, and then it was 8 hours. Now we're up to 5 or 30 minutes. I know it seems a lot in our time frame, but I mean, back in the day, you would sit there for days and
Yeah.
weeks.
This is a real fact too. This is why none of them were smiling. Like, would you be smiling if you had to sit 30 minutes at a time? They really couldn't hold a smile for that long either. But times have changed, right? So we just want to give you guys some context to where all this data, and the daguerreotype was a significant role in the history of photography. The double box camera. So now in 1841, Charles Chevalier. The box was half the size, much more portable, right? And the reason why we're giving you guys this context is because you're already seeing the start to shape, right? We have 30 minutes to, 8 hours to 5 to 30 minutes. We're going from technology advancing rapidly already, right? And it's going half the size and twice the speed. That's already starting to take shape. I can imagine what they were going through at the time. Like, we want faster, we want smaller. So much faster lenses too, right? Technology started to develop a little bit around the lenses, which allowed more light in. So now the exposure time is 3 minutes, 8 hours, 30 minutes to 3 minutes. That's a significant shift in technology right there. 1841.
So in 1855, George Eastman came about, and that should ring a bell for you guys, because I want you guys to start thinking about film and think about his first camera, the Kodak. So it's all coming together, right?
So anyone under or over the age of probably 30 or 35 should recognize that name. I'd be curious, actually. Maybe this summer we'll post on the community, is how many people recognize that Kodak brand now.
It was a box camera with a fixed focal lens and a single shutter speed. Can you imagine shooting with a single shutter speed and a fixed focal lens? Talk about how you'd have to get creative. I mean, that's a challenge. It came preloaded with enough film for 100 exposures, which seems like a lot. But then once you were done with those 100 exposures, you actually had to send the whole camera back to the factory to be processed and reloaded. So then you're without your camera. So you really had to make those 100 exposures count. And then the film was also the start of motion photography, which is what we call filmmakers. So if you get it, filmmakers were making film.
Imagine buying a camera that you have 100 shots, and not just you have to swap a roll, but you have to send it back to the manufacturer.
No, you used to do this. Remember those point and shoot cameras?
Well, yeah, I guess to a degree. That's a good point. All right, so now we're up to 1900. The Brownie camera, which may sound familiar to some of you. Mass marketed. That was the first real camera that was mass produced and marketed. And because so it became inexpensive, it became accessible, inexpensive. So it became more accessible to the masses, really. Introduced the concept of a snapshot. So it wasn't like a carefully planned camera. It didn't need to be as much. It was extremely popular, remained in use until the 1960s, right? Imagine a camera remaining in use that's created now for 60 years. So it was very well received in the photo community.
I think we like to exchange our cameras every 2 years.
Yeah,
Every
60 years, that's pretty
sometimes.
impressive.
In 1907, the first color photography was born. It was created by the Lumiere brothers in France, and it consisted of a glass plate with color photography methods that were based on a screen plate filter. It used dyed color grains of a potato starch and black and white emulsion to create color images. This marked the beginning of a new era in photography, allowing the capture of images in color for the first time in a relatively accessible manner. So can you imagine everything's black and white, and then you see a picture with color?
that's really relevant right now too, right? Because right now we'll get into this a little bit later about the technology that just launched this last week. And I really do equate that, and I don't take that too lightly. It's the equivalent of this shift right here from black and white to color photography. Like the impact that that must have had. This didn't take shape for another 60 years, by the way. It didn't really gain traction. It wasn't commonplace to have color photography in just the average day until about the 50s and realistically like the 70s. So for about like 60 years or so, this technology existed, but it wasn't, widely available and widely used. But it did exist. It's interesting.
In 1930 was the development of the 35 millimeter. So now you can actually see this camera. It might look a little bit more familiar. This is the Argus rangefinder. So, I feel like we all, if we look back in our old photography camera kits, we probably have something that looks similar to this. It was mass produced, it was inexpensive, it was much more compact, and the advances in film technology and optics, it became possible to get even quality images from a smaller negative area because they were now projecting the images when they printed it. So instead of having a medium format film size, you're actually shooting on smaller film and then projecting the image to be bigger because technology had advanced.
I bet Fuji released this camera that looked like this right now would be a big hit.
They do have one like that.
All right, you want to take this one?
In 1928, the Rolleiflex came about. This is the first medium format roll film. It used to be called the old standard, which was originally simplified to just be called the standard. So this was like the standard camera. It introduced an automatic film counter. So imagine how helpful this was for photographers, knowing if they have 10 pictures left or one, because you know how it is. You just blow through your pictures, you don't even know. So they would do this because the counter sensed the thickness of the film. Also, there was high quality lenses manufactured by Zeiss and Schneider, which allowed for smaller, lighter, and more compact cameras, more compact than their imitators. So it was actually very innovative.
And you'll see this trend here too, right? Everything's going towards smaller and lighter. And that's not too dissimilar from where things are headed these days as well. So now we're up to 1935, the world's first 35 millimeter SLR, not DSLR, but SLR. The Kina Exacta, wide adoption in the US and around the world. So this really just took the whole world by storm. It still had waist level focusing, right? So we're not used to seeing it. We take it for granted. We put a camera up to our eye. Maybe not so much anymore with mobile photography. But waist level focusing, this was a thing. This was normal. This was standard. And what happened was it was a reverse of the image. So the photographer had to kind of mentally reverse or invert the image every time they were taking a photo, right? Think about that, like the things we take for granted. To brighten the viewfinder, Zeiss incorporated a Fresnel lens in between the ground glass screen and the pentaprism, right? So some serious technology advancements that were taken quite quickly. It's a few years later.
And finally, we have auto exposure. So this was a Super Kodak 620 pack, and it cost $225 at the time, which would be roughly the equivalent of $5,000 now. So let's say you're in the market to buy one of these. Let's go to eBay and see what would it be worth? $30. Oh, well.
Does not hold
It
value.
did not hold value, but at the time it was really remarkable.
Yeah. So next time you spend $3, $4, or $5,000 camera, consider what you're getting for that these days. 1949, first instant camera. So this name was synonymous with instant photography, a Polaroid, right? It just became a thing. It was a Polaroid. Known as a land camera after its developer, Edward Land, invented self-developing film. So think about like these advancements, what that must have felt like back then, like to be saying like, if they had a podcast that would say what we're saying right now, right? We're living in the future. We have a camera that we can carry around in a small backpack, and we have self-developing film. Like that's crazy. That they must have been thinking that they were living in the future. And it's kind of funny to think about in another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, people looking back on this. And calling this the future of photography, this will be antiquated. And
Historic
the
photography.
reason why we're going through this is because we want to give you historical and cultural context to what we mean when we talk about the future, because the future is always like this thing that's right over the horizon at whatever stage you are in the history and the landscape of photography. So still remains as one of the top selling cameras of all time. Think about that. the top selling camera of all time was the one that gave us instant access to that image, right? To that instant memory.
In 1950s, Nikon, Canon, and Pentax came on the scene, and Nikon had their first FSLR. It was the world's first system camera with interchangeable lenses and accessories. So finally, now you can actually not just be shooting 35 millimeter, you could be shooting with the 50 millimeter, you could be shooting with the other lenses that were accessible. And this probably changed everyone's creativity. Imagine it with a world of opportunities.
Yeah, now you have a camera kit,
Yeah.
right? Now you have accessories you got to buy. That's where B&H was invented, right here. Okay, 1969, invention of the digital sensor. I love this photo. These guys won a Nobel Prize for this. They invented basically the foundation of the camera's sensor, of the digital sensor, the CCD, charge coupling device. George Smith and William Boyle. And this is crazy. It took them an hour to do this. They sketched this out. They weren't even trying to develop the camera sensor, by the way. It was actually more towards video that was applied for, but they did this in an hour. And in 1975, they demonstrated the first CCD camera with image quality sharp enough for broadcast television. And you're going to see this take shape over the next decade or so, or 2 decades and then onward, is a lot of the camera technology inventions were more towards cinema or broadcast TV, really, rather than still images, benefited from this technology ever since. So we owe a lot to these guys in an hour. So next time you have a free hour in your hands, think about what you're doing for the future of photography.
In 1981, the world's first prototype of a digital camera came into the scene. This was the Sony Mavica, a magnetic video camera. It recorded onto a 2-inch floppy disk. Do you even remember what a floppy disk is?
I'm ashamed to say I do.
It captured up to 25 images per disk, and the resolution, get this, was 0.7 megapixels. This wasn't even a digital camera. It was a video camera that would take freeze frames of the video stills. So it was creating stills from video. 0.7 megapixels.
I find that fascinating. Like the beginnings of digital photography really came because, well, where there's a will, there's a way, and everyone thought that the future of the industry was in broadcast TV and video. And it took years for a video to come back full circle into the new DSLRs that we're going to get to. 0.7 megapixels. Sometimes say I have 12 megapixels in my phone. Think about what they were dealing with back then. All right, so 1980s to 1990s. We're going to speed this up a little bit because this is the future of photography after all. 1986, Kodak introduces the world's first 1 megapixel sensor. Right, that is a huge headline for them. 1989, world's first portable digital camera, the Fuji DSX. 1990, a year later, Kodak developed the photo CD system. The CDs in the 90s just brings back some good memories. 1991, Kodak released the world's first digital camera system. 1998, JPEG and MPEG was still established. I bet most people that are watching this right now still have cameras that shoot JPEG and MPEG, just about everyone, right? Think about that. It's almost like 30 years ago. 30 years ago, that same technology, it's just until recently, this new HEIC standards started to take shape, HEIF, HEIC, but we're still using these JPEGs on the web almost always. That's the most common, and that's 30 years old, that technology. That's crazy. 1995, the first camera with an LCD on the back of the screen, on the back of the camera, the Casio QV10. And then 1996, the first camera to use compact flash, the Kodak DC-25. And think about that, 1995, the first camera with an LCD on the back. I thought that must have been the craziest thing because we're close enough to my history that I can remember the first time I saw I actually experienced a digital camera where you press the playback button and you can see the image on the back of your screen, that instant feedback loop. That is a magical moment for people who take that for granted. Take a step back and think about that. For all before that, all photography, people would just wait for weeks, right? And then all of a sudden, if you take a picture and instantly see the back of that image, that is a magical moment to be able to do that. That was 1995.
I think that's
was
really what made going to the digital so appealing, because you didn't have to wait till the film to be developed.
Yeah.
And you didn't have that unease. You're like, wait, the quality may suck, but at least I'll know if I got the shot.
Yeah. And think about that. I know, because some people might even point this out. That Polaroid camera has been doing it for a long time now.
True.
Right? There's a reason why that was the most popular camera in the world for such a long time. That instant gratification is a really big factor in a lot of this technology.
Now we're kicking into the first digital SLR. So the Nikon D1 came out and it was cost about $6,000 at the time, which would be the equivalent of $12,000 now. So, you know, when that came out, it was 2.7 megapixels and 4.5 frames per second. So think about when you buy your next camera, maybe it's going to be around $6,000 or $4,000 and all the added benefits that you have to it. This camera, 2.7.
It also weighed 150 pounds.
No, it didn't. Come on.
You could just see how heavy that is. All right, so 2003, that is the watershed moment. That's the moment where digital cameras started outselling film cameras, right? And many of us probably can remember the debate. There actually was a debate, and I guess rightly so at the time. You know, where's the point where we start transitioning into digital? All the magazines were like, when we go to digital, this and that. 2003 was a moment, and B&H probably has this etched somewhere in their hallways. That's the camera started outselling the film cameras.
So now our big transition was DSLRs to mirrorless. And what were the benefits of transitioning? I can remember going through this process because I still have a DSLR and I have a mirrorless. So, you know, I still weigh out the benefits, and obviously the future is mirrorless. But some of the benefits include you can have a live view of representation of your picture, like exact live. You can change your exposure and you can see the changes happening in real time. There's a histogram to see if your picture is going to come out great, and zebra effects to know if you're going to be overexposed or underexposed.
If you don't mind, that's a really important point, right? So mirrorless cameras, there's still kind of people that kind of argue about whether we should do DSLR or mirrorless. When you feel a mirrorless camera for the first time and you see that histogram, you see that zebra, you see the white balance, you can see your image live. That's very different than what we talked about previously about just taking a picture and looking at it on the back of your screen later. You're seeing this real time, right? Then you get a focus magnifier that you can zoom in for critical focus. And then you have the size and the weight.
And then you can even preview the image, like we're saying. There's a silent shutter, which is great for people who are doing things in TV, doing set photography, weddings, where you don't actually want to hear that loud click clunk, click clunk. You can actually make it silent. You can even view the image in the electronic viewfinder, which you never used to be able to do with the DSLR. And what's great about that is you're looking at it through the whole of the electronic viewfinder, and it's a dark environment, so you can actually see the detail and actually see like a really good representation, unlike the back of the LCD screen, which might be reflective and might be a little bit harder to see in broad daylight.
Yeah, I remember we used to have these loops, right? There's a couple of companies
that
that made them, the Hoodman thing. There's another company that had these things were like giant. They're bigger than my cell phone. And it was just magnifying this terrible resolution screen. Now with these newer generation cameras, because this is really what we're talking about, like what technology we're working with now, we have over 1 million dots in this little viewfinder that blacks out the world around us. And now we don't just get a preview of the image and we look at the result, but we can check critical focus. It's so sharp, it's getting to a point where it almost looks like we're looking through glass. That's where we're at now. And that's incredibly helpful. Be able to, like the last workshop we did in Africa, and I work with a lot of students and they come back from their trips and they're like, well, this image is blurry, it's out of focus. Like now we can correct that. And we did correct that for a lot of our students when we were in Africa, right on the spot. So we can program our cameras to use the EVF to instantly play back the photo, to zoom into where the point of focus was and zoom into 100% on a 1 million dot screen. And you can literally see whether it's sharp or not. And if it's not, increase your ISO, get a faster shutter speed, and go get the shot while you still can. We don't have to wait until later to get back to it. Really, really helpful functional technology that helps us on a daily basis.
Also, the speeds are much quicker. There's a burst rate without blackout frames, which is amazing. And also you can focus on the sensor.
Yeah, focusing on the sensor. What does that really mean? So when we have DSLRs, maybe you guys remember this, but we'd have to calibrate our lenses. There's actually like a focus calibrator tool, and you'd calibrate every lens to your sensor. And even then, depending on if it was a zoom lens, for instance, and you were in the wide angle or telephoto side, it would slightly miss focus. You would front focus or back focus. I can't even remember the last time anyone even uttered the words back focus anymore. So a mirrorless camera just removes all of those problems and you focus right on the sensor itself. So it's much more accurate, much more sharper, much more predictable, and you don't have to calibrate it.
All right, guys, we're coming to the current state of the camera. I'm excited. There have been a lot of advancements. One of them is an advancement in autofocus with AI subject recognition, offering faster and more accurate focusing, including eye detection and subject detection.
We have sensor technology, like major advancements in sensor technology. Cameras are now being equipped with even higher resolution sensors, much better dynamic range, and this continues to develop, but we're almost getting to a point now where we'll get to that in a little bit, but you can see a significant improvement over sensor technology.
And AI-driven noise reduction, enhancing image clarity in low light conditions without compromising details. And that's all being built into the camera.
Yeah. And we're also getting real-time processing. So now the AI, this technology is being built into the camera itself. And that's absolutely huge, right? That shift is going to continue, and it's sort of trickling up from the mobile photography and computational photography. But they're capable of processing images in real time. So this multi-format or multi-image technology allows us to do things like almost completely remove noise, because noise is random, doesn't show up in the same place twice. Multiple pictures, stack them together, remove the noise. We can shift multiple pictures. We get a higher resolution sensor. We can do so many things when we take advantage of multiple photos. Now, JPEG, that was around for 30 plus years, right? We covered that. Single image technology. Now these newer formats, you'll hear of HEIF, HEIC. These are actually wrappers that allow you to save multiple pictures. So if you're shooting with an iPhone, for instance, you know this already, because you can take a picture that has video, stills, and audio in a single frame. So this allows our images to come to life, allows it to capture sound, allows it to do some really cool advanced technology that you couldn't do in a single picture. So the real-time processing is the foundation of that all.
Lastly, computational photography techniques, merging multiple images for camera HDR and panoramic shots. We're going to dive into that a little bit deeper as we continue.
Image stabilization. This is huge. So IBIS, for those who don't know what that is, it's in-body image stabilization. That's just a marketing term, but it's really, really powerful. What that means is we had image stabilization for years, and it's gotten so much better, so much better. We're up to 8 stops of image stabilization. Some cameras, we can handhold cameras for multiple seconds at a time, which is ridiculous. Now, the first image stabilization happened in the lenses, but then some of the bodies, Sony was really leading the way for a while on this, and Micro Four Thirds too, actually. They were shifting the sensor in the camera. When we have in-camera, in-body image stabilization, what that means is we can, one, apply image stabilization to even the older lenses, even to the non-IS or VR lenses. It's those old kind of classic camera lenses. All of them have image stabilization now. And two, if we combine it with the newer technology, the newer lenses, they're actually designed and engineered in a way that they work together to give you an even better image stabilization, which allows us to get up to 7 or 8 stops of image stabilization, which is absolutely crazy. You're almost at a point now where we don't really need a tripod to shoot in low light environments.
I had my hands on the new OM systems, OM1 Mark II, and it has 8.5 stops of image stabilization, which is really impressive.
It's crazy. And there are scientists out there saying that we're reaching the point, theoretically, that the rotation of the Earth itself is preventing us from going beyond those physical limits. Imagine designing and engineering or telling photographers back then, it's just like the rotation of the Earth itself that's preventing us from doing over 8 to 10 stops of stabilization. That's ridiculous. Like, what? We are living in the future in so many ways.
Okay, to finish off the list, innovative lenses. There's a focus on developing lenses with wider apertures for greater creative controls. Like I have a lens that's 1.4 f2, and now there's zoom lenses at this point, which is amazing. You're able to create so many things, like having a prime lens, but instead it's a zoom lens that starts at f2 or f 1.8, which is really, really remarkable technology for lenses.
Yeah, we were shooting last night or a couple nights ago, the Northern Lights with a 14 millimeter 1.4, was it, or a 1.8? 1.8. That's wild. Imagine people back then if you even showed them that. Like, what? That's crazy. 360-degree cameras. So the use of 360-degree cameras is growing, particularly in applications like virtual reality. This is going to come into shape a lot more in the future. I really think that now we have screens and technology that we're going to get into in a little bit that allows us to actually experience. Because up until now, we can capture 360, but what do we really do with it, right? Anyone who's bought a 360 camera, like, what do we really do with it? Now we're getting to a point. We're going to do a whole presentation on the future of technology and how we share images. But we're just entering this new phase of the future. That's going to allow us to display 360 images in a whole new way. That's going to take all those old 360 shots and including the new ones and really bring them to life in a whole new way.
All right, so let's dive into these advancements. First of all, we're talking about AI autofocus. Now we're able to do recognition targeting, which can be humans, birds, animals, butterflies, trains, planes. It's just really amazing because the cameras are now able to track and find subjects. So it's able to identify the subjects with AI.
And it's not just able to identify them, but it's able to predict their movements. That's where the AI really comes in too, right? And we're still in the beginning stages. This is going to get better and better. So at the moment, for most cameras, we still have to say whether it's an animal or a person. That's going to change, I think, soon, probably very soon. But the predictive focus, that takes focus to a whole nother level. And you combine that with the mirrorless technology that's focusing on the sensor and the object recognition that's recognizing the subject and then the eye and then the near eye. Now we can start shooting 85 millimeter lenses, 1.2, excuse me, sir. And then 1.2, sorry, we're in a lab, so there's other people on here. But you can shoot like an 85 1.2 and never throw a single photo away because we could focus on the close eye and it will nail it just about every time. And that even carries over into video now, which is absolutely insane.
Even the OM system has a starry sky autofocus feature, which is pretty cool because it can actually find stars. For any night photographers out there, they know it's kind of hard sometimes to track down those stars. And the OM system has now built it into their system, which I hope all cameras start doing.
Enhanced image quality, sensor technology. So we talked about the history a little bit, but sensors have come a long way. BSI, backside illuminated sensors and gapless sensors. Basically what that means is we have a whole bunch of pixels. We have a whole bunch, right? We have millions of them. That's why we have a megapixel. And there was always this compromise that we had to make, right? Either you do less millions of pixels, fewer pixels, but the pixels themselves are larger. And so you get a little bit better noise reduction, but then you have less resolution. Now, if you fit more pixels on this of paper, the same sensor size, then they're densely compact. And the thing is, like, there's a slight gap between all of them. So the more pixels you squeeze into a small space, the noisier it gets. Technology has advanced to a point now where there's almost no compromise, almost no compromise. So now we're getting high resolution sensors, which is more megapixels, but we're also getting much better low light capability. And that's because those gaps are almost completely been removed. And we took all the electronics that fed all those electronics in the sensor and put it behind the chip itself. So the backside part of it, and that just basically gives us much better sensors, much better light, and there's no compromise. The dynamic range has significantly improved, right? So now we're up to around 15 stops on the latest generation of cameras. It's not quite the human eye. We're going to get to that, but it's getting there. In fact, the limitation is not the human eye. The limitation is the screen technology, and we're going to get into that in a little bit as well. And then we have ISO invariant. So this is a new type of sensor technology too. Sony has kind of led the way in that. And then now the newest crop of cameras are also doing dual gain. So the bigger difference between the ISO invariant. So ISO invariant basically means it doesn't quite matter the ISO that you're choosing. That's basically what it means. So it's really good for if you want to protect the highlights in high dynamic range scenes, especially when you're shooting landscapes and the sun's in the shot, or you're shooting night photography and you're getting either the moon or the stars, you can either expose to the left, basically. So you're protecting the highlights, and then later in post, you're bringing up the shadows, right? So it's better to do that and bring up the shadows in post because it's almost the same thing as bringing it up using your ISO, except this time you're not blowing out the highlights. You bring up the shadows, not the whole exposure. So really, really helpful for dynamic range. Now, the opposite side, the dual gain sensors, that's really good for, let's say you're shooting sports in a low light environment, a basketball game or something like that, where you need to crank up the ISO. What the engineers are doing now is they're developing the technology and the sensors in a way that it's almost perfecting it at a certain ISO level, and it's optimizing the sensor output at a certain ISO level to give you the best results with the least amount of light. So you can shoot with a higher ISO and not have as much of an issue with the noise. And this way you get faster shutter speeds in the process. So much better suited for street photography, low light scenarios, something like that.
But let's talk about the human eye. I'd love to guess how many people know what the with the dynamic range is
This
really
came up
high.
immediately for us, right? We're like, well, okay, this is all great, but what does that really mean
Right.
to us, right? So it would be interesting to see people's guesses on this. This is the first one, 130 megapixels. That's roughly the resolution of a human eye, right? So all this technology for a second, that's amazing that we're still not replicating the eye, the human eye, the eye camera. 130
This eye
megapixels.
camera.
We're getting close to, by the way, and something we didn't really talk about too much, but we're going to get into that next. I think the pixel shifting, dynamic range.
So your eye has a dynamic range of 21 stops, and the newest cameras are up to 15 stops. So it's getting close.
Yeah, and this is all, it is science-based. In fact, if you go to our website, right, the future of that photography, we'll have links to the videos that we use as source material for this. But it's sort of loosely scientist-based, but it's backed up by multiple studies in multiple real-world scenarios, because the human eye is actually, it turns out, quite a difficult things to narrow down, because we have our field of view, and then we have our resolution in what we call the fovea, which is right in the middle of our eye. So things appear much sharper in the middle of our eye than your peripheral surroundings. But roughly speaking, 130 megapixels, we're not there yet with modern cameras. 21 stops of light, we're not there with modern cameras either. So we're approaching that, but it's still organic memories, still the best way to go.
Yeah, gotta capture with your mind.
And the ISO range, this one was interesting.
So the ISO range of your eye can go from 1 to 800,000.
That's
One.
pretty wild. Now, this was tested in a bunch of different environments, in low light environments, in bright environments. It was actually quite an interesting study. So definitely check out our website for that. But an ISO range of 1. This is, I'm going to get into a little bit when we talk about what I really want, rather than just what the manufacturers want,
Sure.
right? It's really going to be interesting to see, why aren't we having cameras right now that are going below ISO 50, right? We talk about ND filters and stuff like that. We're going to get into this in a little bit, but wouldn't it be nice to have an ISO that goes down to 1? What that would mean,
Yeah.
right? For long exposures and bright sunny days without any extra gear to carry, that would be huge.
So there's been a lot of advancements with pixel shifting. And for those of you who don't know what pixel shifting is, it's, let's say your camera is a Micro Four Thirds, let's say the OM1 Mark II. It's a 20 megapixel camera, but it can be, through pixel shifting, 50 and up to 80 megapixel camera. So what it's doing is combining multiple images with just a pixel apart and making a higher resolution image. The benefits of this is you don't need to have a huge mirrorless camera anymore, or a huge DSLR with lots of megapixels. You can actually have a Micro Four Thirds camera and use this new technology to create a bigger sensor and more megapixels.
Computational photography. So now we're really getting to the thick of it, right? This is where we're at now. We're basically, like, to sum it all up, we're using engineering and math to overcome physics. That's basically what computational photography is, right? So machine learning, algorithms, we're basically using smarts to get around physics. So I've been shooting with the iPhone for years, and it used to be, actually on B&H, there's a lot of older presentations you can look up where I talked about how to get around the physical limitations of the iPhone. A smaller sensor, less resolution, greater depth of field, but not a shallow depth of field, noisy images, dynamic range. Now it's a very different conversation. Now, when I talk about computational photography and I talk about advancements in the iPhone, I do presentations and we do entire courses, actually. We were just talking right before this about how we filmed the course in New York City on the iPhone. It's a very different conversation, because now it's like I'm using the most advanced camera ever made. I'm not worried about limitations anymore, right? We're using operations at a speed of trillions of operations per second. Talk about multi-image and stacking and computational photography and in-camera post or processing. This is just a whole nother level of photography. So this ushers in a whole nother age of what it means to be a photographer and using cameras. So using multiple images, using image data, and having a supercomputer at the ready, processing in real time these photographs, allows us to take, just honestly, the technology we have now, even in the most basic cameras, even in our phones, even for the last few years, are way more advanced than any photographs ever used to create the most iconic photos that any of you are thinking of right now at this moment. And that's a really powerful place to be. And this is really what's going to lead in the future. Where does this all go? It's gonna be software driven. It's gonna be math and algorithm driven. It's gonna be multi-image exposures. It's gonna be all the science and software. And what's leading the way is the mobile photography space because, well, that's where the money and the users are right now. But what I'm waiting for is for that technology to trickle up in a more meaningful way. So this computational photography starts getting introduced into interchangeable lens camera systems. That's where this is really going to start to take off. So we're still in the beginning stages of that, but computational photography isn't just here to say it's redefining what it means to be a photographer in these days.
This image shows how the iPhone's image processor and neural engine automatically enhances each photo. So if you look underneath each photo, it says auto exposure, auto white balance, auto focus. What's happening here is it's taking 9 different images and using deep fusion to merge the clearest parts of all the frames together, pixel by pixel, forming a single composite image with the best parts of each image. So this is why when you look at your iPhone and then you look at the back of your camera, and you say, why am I even shooting with this thing? And the iPhone looks so good or your smartphone looks so good, is because it's already doing this computational photography to make your image look great. But the image you're capturing on your camera isn't doing that right away. And you have to do some post-processing to achieve that same look.
And exactly right. It's already doing this. That's very appropriate. It's literally doing this when you open up your camera app, right? It's not doing it when you press the shutter. It's already done when you press the shutter. There's a 0 shutter lag. It's doing this in real time, saving it to the buffer. So when you press the shutter, it's instant and it's recording what it's already captured, essentially. And all this happens in real time. That's what's so impressive about this.
So some other computational features that we're going to talk about the iPhone because we're both iPhone users, but other smartphones have this as well, is night mode. So I'm a night photographer, and if I tried to take this picture, I would probably need about a 30-second exposure to try and get the stars. So this is taken in the night mode and on the phone, but the thing is about the iPhone, it only takes 1 second long exposures. So how could it capture this much light when it goes into night mode? Is actually using computational photography to achieve a 30-second exposure. But it's really taking 30 different frames and combining them to gather this much light. So this is the before and this is the after. So also a secret trick when you're doing the iPhone is if you put it on a tripod stand and it's dark enough, it'll go up to 30 seconds.
Yeah, it has a gyro sensor built in. So it will recognize, talk about advancements in technology. It recognizes itself when itself is on a tripod or not, and then recommends the right shutter speed for you. And it turns out, like, is there a difference between 31-second exposures or 130-second exposure, the way the DSLRs? And it turns out there actually is. It's actually been better to do 31-second exposures because the noise is never in the same place twice. That's how it gets rid of all that noise.
Also, another computational feature is portrait mode. So a lot of people would buy expensive prime lens so they could blur out the background. So if I wanted a lens with a shallow depth of field, I'd buy an f2 lens. But now, even with the smartphones, you can simulate that same look by using computational photography and achieve that look and even change it after the fact. So the problem with if I shot a portrait at f2 and got her nose in focus, but her eyes were out of focus, I'm stuck with that image. But with these features now that are being built into smartphones, because they're the newest technology, you can actually change the exposure or change the actual dynamic, the depth of field actually after the fact, which is really amazing. So in this picture, it's actually the same picture. I took it in portrait mode and then changed one to be f16 and f1.8 and was able to change the same look with with the same picture, 2 different looks.
Yeah, so what used to be like a flaw, right, now is actually a huge advantage. Like, get everything in focus and then choose later,
Yeah.
right? That is huge. You never miss a photo again. If any of us uses like a 51.4 or something like that, and you miss the focus, just throw the photo away. Like, there's nothing you can do. Now it's like, forget it. You can choose, and there's apps out there, even on the phone, that you can point to choose the focus. You can press the focus after. So we can focus on that person in the background, for instance, if we wanted to. We would choose the focus afterwards. That's creativity in at our hands.
And it kind of makes me think like, I don't really need that 1.2 lens anymore because I run the risk of making it out of focus, because I'm never going to shoot at exactly 1.2 because the depth of field is so shallow. But even if I shot it at f4, made sure the whole person was in focus, I can actually go in post-processing. Now Lightroom has the blur mode and actually change the focus then. So technology is advancing so much that gear that we used to be prized possessions, like these prime lenses, are not even as important as they used to be.
Yeah, like there should be bells ringing in everyone's head right now, or light bulbs going off. Wait, do I need that full frame sensor as much? Well, I don't know. The noise reduction technology. Do I need that shallow depth of field prime lens? I don't know, because we can throw this out of focus afterwards. It's interesting.
And even using computational features like live mode in the phone, you can achieve long exposures. So you don't even need to bring that filter pack with you to achieve this. This is in live mode, you can achieve a long exposure by holding your camera steady for 2 seconds before and 2 seconds after. And when you click on the long exposure feature, it actually blurs the parts that were moving. So I didn't need a tripod for this. I handheld this. As opposed to having my camera, putting on a filter, putting on the tripod, waiting 20 seconds, and trying to achieve a similar looked image using computational photography. It blends all the parts that were moving.
That's fascinating.
Really amazing.
That really is.
Other cameras are having this built in. So the OM system is really leading the way in computational photography. And I feel honored that I was able to test out the OM1 Mark II because it had so many great features. It had the built-in ND filters. So like the iPhone, I just have to click on, I want to put it on an ND filter on. They have a bunch of varieties and I can handheld do an ND filter and create pictures like this instead of having to carry a filter pack with me. Also, cameras are starting to have HDR built into the sensor. So you can actually take a picture that exposes for the highlights and the shadows, and it puts it all together in camera. So you don't actually have to do the post-processing after the fact.
That's so helpful.
It is.
That's so helpful because remember the cameras are only getting about 15 stops, right? So
Right.
we want to capture what the human eye is seeing. We still have to rely on these techniques. Image stabilization is huge, right? We talked about this before. We're up to 6, 7, 8 stops of stabilization. Basically, we're at a point where we almost don't need to carry a tripod. Right between that and the low light capability that we have, we can increase the ISO. We can remove it in post if we need to. We already have a good base sensor. A lot of the cameras are shooting ISO 50 or 100 now. And then the stabilization lets us take multi-second exposures, in some cases handheld. It's changing how we photograph. It's changing how we shoot. And a lot of places where, there's a lot of places that we go to when we travel that we'll get yelled at immediately if we bring a tripod. So it makes actually, some photos possible for the first time. All right, so the A9 III, we can't do this presentation without talking about that because that's still very much in the news. Global shutter. So basically, to give you background on sensor technology, we take it for granted, but it doesn't really read the sensor all at once. It scans it in lines. And so what's going to happen is if someone's moving, then they're going to be in a different position at the bottom of the scan than the top. It's what we call the jello effect. Most cameras work this way. And this is also why we have, beginning a front curtain and a back curtain. So it closes and then it opens and closes. And so we have a sync speed, right? So if we have an instant readout on a fully electronic sensor, what that means is it's opening and closing instantly, all the pixels at the same time. What that means is now we can shoot in silent mode with no mechanical shutter, and there's no compromise to that anymore. We don't see that X pattern that we see in artificial lighting. We don't see a lot of different artifacts that would come at the expense of having a silent mode. We can truly shoot silently, right? So all the media, for instance, as far as I'm concerned, should be shooting this. On the press conferences and stuff like that, when you hear all the clicks, those are going to go away. Sports events too, right? Same thing, tennis, golf. It's going to be really powerful. But it also means that the sync speed, we usually sync up to about 250th of a second with our flash, not an issue anymore, right? We can shoot at any speed we want to and sync because we don't have the mechanical shutter. So we could take one flash and make it the equivalent of like 8 flashes. It's really powerful.
Aerial imaging is also improving so much. So I have become an aerial imager or a drone flyer, and I just love the ability to see something different than what everyone else is getting. Like to be able to go above the mountains or to go over the fjords and shoot back at the cliffs has been revolutionizing my photography. And the technology with the drones is increasing so much.
Yeah, to think about, I mean, really, we're talking about the advancements of technology. That's what this is all about. Now we're at a point where we can put a camera anywhere in space, right? Anywhere you want, just over the trees, just around that corner, just over that lake, looking backwards. Think about the creative possibilities that this has. This is really what we're talking about with the future of technology and advancements that allow us to create images. Like right now we're in Lofoten and there's a bunch of photographers here, but when we put our cameras up and we both have drones, we're getting shots from angles that are unique to the angles that we're choosing. And it all transmits in real time back to a screen that we're hand holding, which is just wild to me. It's absolutely crazy.
All right, guys, thank you for hanging in from the past and the present. Now we're going into the future. So what do you think the future is going to look like, Cliff?
This is the fun part, right? So augmented reality, I think that's going to become a thing for sure. There's going to be overlays, right? We have the mirrorless screens now, but there's going to be overlays telling us what to look for, what to see. There's already cameras out there that are helping photographers out in terms of composition. It's going to be quite interesting. The gesture and voice control, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I know that the Android has this because I know some of my students will be like, smile or cheese, and the Android would fire. But I feel like there has to be an improvement nowadays that you could say something that would trigger your camera. I mean, we've been doing this button and this button for so long. Let's make it innovative. Let's like say something else.
Yeah, if you guys remember the light camera, the light field technology, it's sort of gone away a little bit, but it hasn't gone away. It's being adapted more to medical imaging more than anything else. But the concept is really interesting. It's capturing light in a very different way, the direction of the rays, and it basically enables us to capture the focus and the depth of field after the image is taken. So we're getting around this with physics a little bit with with the beta software of the depth of field, the blur capture in Lightroom, and there's some other technologies out there too. But playing around with depth of field, I don't think this technology is completely gone just yet.
Holographic imaging. I mean, this is straight out of Star Trek or Star Wars. I'm not sure which one, but I mean, why not have a holographic image? I feel like it's only about a matter of time before we can experience this.
It seems ridiculous. I know, like everyone's probably like, what are they talking about? But the experience that we just had recently with the Apple Vision, and we're gonna get to that probably in a little bit. Um, it, it it's nothing short of magic. It
I think
really is nothing short of magic. But at the same time, it leaves you thinking, how do I share this with others?
Mhm.
And I think if we can capture what we're about to show you, but in a way that we can share this with others, that's where the holographic imaging is going to take shape probably sooner than we think. And I'd love to see that for this reason.
I agree. So speaking of the Apple Vision Pro, I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but this is the future, integrating technology and cameras with a wearable tech. Cameras could seamlessly integrate with wearable devices such as glasses or goggles. And Cliff and I had the experience of trying this out. I actually brought it inside. You want to grab it? It's actually right on
In the room?
Yeah.
Sure.
So what I love about this technology is it's using spatial computing, which is a words that I would never put together, but Apple has done it again. They've created a technology that's going to revolutionize how we experience photos, how we experience videos, how we even manage, our apps. So if you thought you were addicted to your phone, wait till you get your hands on one of these. I have to say, I think it's really great for making technology and putting it in our hands and revolutionizing how we work with editing and such. But I do have to say I'm worried about everyone kind of diving into their own little bubbles of their reality with their goggles. But that's a whole nother thing we're going to talk about. So let's dive into the future, which is Apple Vision Pro. So here's an example of what the experience is like. And here's a little video. And Cliff has joined us. So with Apple Vision Pro, this is the experience of looking at your photos. So you put the goggles on, you use this little pinching feature, and you could pinch it so it comes closer. And I want you guys to see how big that screen is. It's no longer looking at the size of your 16-inch MacBook or even your 24-inch TV. You're able to make it as big as you want, as big as your whole room. So you're actually looking at your pictures larger than life, and it's like amazing to see the detail and quality. When I've done it, I've actually seen my pictures for the first time, it felt like, right? It was just like a different experience of viewing our imagery.
Yeah, this falls into the category of it's like one of those things that you have to see. We got this the day it launched. and then I immediately flew for about 20 hours in a row from Vegas to Frankfurt to Oslo to Bodo. Um, it was just incredible. It's the most immersive thing I've ever seen. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation when we talked about the future of photography and technology and the equivalence of that feeling it must have been like for the first time when you see a color image, when you're used to basically about 140 years of history of black and white photography. And then all of a sudden, like color starts to become on the scene. And what that must have felt like. Most people didn't accept it at first, by the way, too. If you look it up, it's quite interesting. It wasn't considered like a serious mechanism or a serious medium. But when you see this, when you feel your images. That's all I can describe it. You experience and feel your photos in a way that you couldn't possibly imagine until you try it. And this is certainly a sign of things to come as the technology develops.
Here's an example of what it's like to look at a panorama. So once you go to panorama, that little square, you actually can immerse yourself in the scene of the panoramic. And I have to say, my breath was taken away. I did a 25 stitched photo pano with the drone overlooking the harbor. I actually felt a little bit like I was so lifelike. There's so much detail. And I'm sure a lot of you take these panoramas and do nothing with it because there's not really a good way to look at them. Maybe on your phone, they don't play well on Facebook or Instagram. But if you ever want to see your panos like up close and personal, get the Apple Vision Pro.
Keep taking them because that's the promise of the panel, right? A higher resolution, a larger format. But the downside is they just look a little small and flattened and narrow on our tiny little screens. What's the point of shooting a giant landscape and then you're squishing it down to this tiny little screen? Of course, it's not until we just like this that our images, even the old images, totally come alive. Like you can basically walk into the scene from these old photos. And then it's going to be funny when you look back on this video, like here are some, because now we're at a point where we can capture the 3D photos and VR. And this goes back to what I was saying before about the 360 cameras, right? Capture it all, capture everything, because you're going to appreciate it. Now we have technology that allows you to basically go inside of your photos. And think about what that means for your family, your friends, your great grandkids, that kind of thing. To walk back or your older history, like to go back in and experience the photos of your loved ones and those magic moments, those precious moments. This is like a mark of something that is going to take off, I think, in a big way, and it should. And so it's something to know about now because we're just at the very beginning stages of this. It's very early adoption. These are quite expensive, but it's a sign of things to come.
So another thing it can do is capture spatial video, which is like 3D video. And it's hard to tell here. If you had the goggles on, you would look like you're sitting at the campfire with this family, which is amazing. I've done one where Cliff was having a snowball fight with me in the snow, and it feels like you're actually getting pelted with the snow. It is one of the coolest things. And you can see here is kind of the final scene is the apps that you can project all around your room. We won't get into that because I'd like to do a whole presentation about this product. But I just wanted to talk to you how about relates to photography and creating this 3D videos, which there's two ways to do it. One is with the goggles, and the other one is if you have the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you can shoot 3D footage with that. So it's not going to look like anything when you film it, but when you put the goggles on, you'll actually see it in 3 dimensions.
And you're preserving, it's like shooting color back then. You're preserving your moments now for the technology that is going to be coming down the road.
Like, I
Right.
can imagine how this is gonna drastically improve like wedding photography. When you can like circle around the couple or your grandparents or the toast, you'll actually feel like you're at the wedding. Like, or even like those special like grandma's 80th birthday party. You know, like I think in a way, like Cliff is saying, it takes you back into that moment because it's also all immersive. You're in this goggle view, which darkens everything, but the experience you're seeing, and you feel like you're a part of it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
All right, so now we're going to get to the part that we want to get some interaction. And Derek, you're a part of this too. What do you want for the camera of the future? So we're going to kind of cut back to the live feed over here. We have a lot of ideas of what we want to see in the camera of the future, but we kind of want to go and ask the audience to text in if there's anyone out there, text in what the features you want to see in the future of the camera. And I don't want you to limit yourself to what you think the camera should be. Maybe it's a headset. Maybe it's glasses. Maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe it's
I,
something you wear on your shirt.
I don't want to do
Derek,
any work. I just want to think it.
Derek, your microphone's on.
Oh, whoops, sorry. Turn to Denny. Mute me. Mute me. I want a camera that just makes me money.
Thanks.
I'm gonna throw out while we're giving them
Hold on, hold on, hold
time.
on. You know the best way to make money with your camera, right?
Oh,
Sell it.
sell it.
Sell it. Yeah, that's an old photo joke.
Working on that. I'm going to throw out a non-related question because we did get a question in. We're in the business of education here. So I'm going to throw out a non-related question that's going to buy some time because I do want to hear what the audience thinks and what features are out there that you would want. So Mark is asking about the IBIS, in-body stabilization. Mark doesn't understand the nomenclature, X stops of image stabilization. What does the amount of light reaching the sensor have to do with lack of jitteriness?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's a really good question, actually, because they don't make it very clearly, do they? What the heck does stops of image stable? What is a stop? Let's start there, right? What the heck is a stop? You guys know what a knock is, right? We had dinner tonight and it cost us 600 knocks. It's just a made up thing, right? If we say US dollars, we say the stock dropped, 300 points. It's just like a unit, right? It only has meaning when we apply value to it. So forget about like an actual stop of light means nothing itself. Where it comes into play is when you double it or you cut it in half, right? When you double it, you're increasing the light by one stop. When you take whatever light's there and you cut it in half, you're decreasing it by one stop, right? So if I want 2 more stops of light, I'm going to take whatever settings I have on my camera now, and I double it for 1 more stop, and I double it again. Now I could double it either with a larger aperture, I can double it with a longer shutter speed, or I can double it increasing my ISO. Those are the 3 ways that we can double the amount of light. So every time I double the light, I increase the amount of light by 1 stop. So now it starts hopefully to get a little bit clearer of a picture, because if we want 8 stops of light or 8 stops of image stabilization, right? Then what that means is we can relate this to our shutter speed, right? Because when we're talking about, like you said, jitteriness, we're talking about handhold ability. Let's just call it what it is. How slow can we handhold? And why we want to do that is because we want to collect the most amount of light possible. Light literally equals image quality in digital photography. We're taking light, converting it to pixels. The more light, the more pixels. In fact, a lot of cameras, more light, actually, the larger the actual file size, right? So the goal is, with every photo ever, the best exposure is simple. It's just the most amount of light possible. Just no more. Just no more. We want to collect the most amount of light possible. So if it's a dark environment, we're going to go shoot the northern lights tonight, right? And we don't have a tripod or whether it's cold and we don't feel like bringing it with us. We want to get a quick shot. We have a camera that does, let's say, 4 stops of image stabilization, right? What that means is for whatever settings we have right now that looks well exposed, we can decrease the ISO or increase the shutter speed 4 more times. So 6400. I can decrease it to 3200, 1 stop, decrease it to 1600, 2 stops, to 800, 3 stops, and then to 400. So I can get a much higher quality image shooting at ISO 400 versus 6400. And the image stabilization lets you do it. Now, it only works when you have a static scene. So for landscapes, perfect example, right? It's not going to work. Image stabilization has nothing to do with sports, nothing to do with motion at all. But if you're shooting a street scene and it's a low light environment, you're shooting blue hours, shooting landscapes, and you have a camera like the new Micro Four Thirds or something like that, that has 6 or 7 stops of image stabilization. What that really means is every time you count that, think about how low of an ISO you can get away with. So instead of having to be on a tripod, you can hand hold it for 5 seconds sometimes. I would say at least a second or two. Try that. But it used to be like a 50th of a second. Now you can shoot for a second or two, and you can get away with a lower ISO in the process and get a much cleaner, much higher quality photo in the meantime. Does that make sense?
So by just to finish the idea, by lowering your ISO, you're also extending your shutter speed to get the proper exposure. So it's a balance of the two. So that's where the stops come in. It's because you're also extending your shutter speed. So when I was using the OM1 Mark II, it was able to do a 4-second exposure handheld. I thought that was pretty impressive.
So why would you need a tripod at that point, right? I mean, that's what we're really talking about, is the hand holdability of your camera. Now, the average, you can, it's going to vary for everyone, but roughly speaking, there's the 1 over the focal length rule. So if you have a 50 millimeter lens, you can basically handhold to a 50th of a second. But if you want to take a 2-second exposure because you want to shoot at the base ISO, that's where your image stabilization comes into play. And the number of stops is just cutting it in half, cutting it in half, cutting it in half. Every time you cut it in half, you get, or cut the ISO in half, you have 1 stop. Or every time you extend or double your shutter speed, you have 1 stop.
You guys passed.
Yay!
That was tough. That was on the spot. I will throw in, because I think where a lot of people get confused with image stabilization is, like you said, image stabilization does not freeze moving subjects. It is only for you, and how it does that, to get into the technical part of it, is gyroscopic sensors that these cameras have. It's basically like having a built-in gimbal of sorts on the sensor that kind of just balances out the jitteriness of being handheld. Wonderful, wonderful description right there of IBIS. So it doesn't really, the TLDR, for those of you out there too long didn't read, it's not a direct correlation to the stops of light. It really, I guess it's more of like it's a relation. They have to find something to relate it. They're saying, hey, we're buying you the number of stops equivalent to if you were shooting at this speed.
Yeah.
So Mark, I hope that makes sense for Mark that asked that. It is tricky. If you do have a follow-up question, feel free to get it in. Going back to, I'm going to give you guys my answer for what I want to see. I'm not a big fan of computational photography. I am old school, but I do like, if there were a way they could incorporate it into, this one feature of computational photography in a non like gimmicky way, or have it look actually realistic, the shifting of the depth of field of the focus point. I think that's super cool. Like the iPhone commercial where they have, it's like the band photo and it's like, well, tap on the face and that face comes in focus. I like this version. I think that is such a cool aspect. And I know there was a camera that came on the scene. It was one of those like early on, like, hey, we're gonna put 20 lenses on. I forget what the name of the camera was, but it's like you can never take an out of focus picture because we can retroactively change the focus on the picture.
Yeah. So, the L16 camera, the light camera. That was pretty cool technology, right? That was ahead of its time as well. But yeah, this is where we're at right now, is like being at a point where we're not taking these things as for face value as, well, we're just stuck with this. We don't have to be stuck with like locking in our focus, right? We're gonna have a much more fluid understanding of what focus is soon. Really, if you think about that, even our eyes, if we go back to the way we experience the world, our focus changes wherever we look all the time. Our camera should be able to do the same. And what it'll allow us to do is really create some really interesting photographs that's never been done before, right? Because what if we want the nose and the eye in focus? And then we want the back of the hand in focus. We can bring certain parts of the image back in the focus. We can get the front of the flower and the back of the flower in focus, but not the background. It gives us the ability to capture photos based upon our vision, not based upon the limitations of the technology that we're using. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something always interesting to think about, because your eyes really are the ideal lens that every camera manufacturer would love to create something that perfectly mimics the eye. And I think that still is kind of the cool thing, that no one can do it. Maybe one day, but as of this point, you can't accurately mimic it. We're getting there. We're getting there. Mark said perfect explanation, so we did get that solved for him. Sandy says, how does this relate to the iPhone?
All of it.
Yeah.
I mean, really everything we're talking about, it's all interconnected.
I feel like the iPhone is in a way, the iPhone is my perfect camera, because I want a camera that I don't have to change the lenses. I want it to be everything. I'd love the iPhone to have like, let's say a 13 to 600 millimeter built in, so I don't have to change it. But I want a camera that fits into my pocket. I want a camera that you just point at the subject, it auto exposes it. I can change the focus. So in a way, the iPhone is becoming like the dream camera, because it's so easy to use. They've made the interface so easy, and it does so many things through computational photography that, there's a couple things missing. Could be higher megapixels, which is working on this, 48 megapixels now, I think the new one is. And also the lens limitation. I wish it had a longer lens, but I feel like that the iPhone is the one camera that's working on all the improvements that we're looking for.
Yeah, so it's the perfect platform basically for the future of photography. If you think about it, it's like Henry Ford said, if you ask the public what they want, there's the same more horses. Like we've been riding horses and riding horses, riding horses, and we're butting heads with the limitations of physics, right? If you want to collect more light, because let's face it, that's all these cameras are. They're light collecting tools, right? They're fancy light collecting tools. If you want to collect more light, it's just like collecting rain in a storm. You either get a larger bucket, right? You get a larger sensor, or you get a larger aperture lens. And that's sort of like where we're at. If you want to have the best of both worlds, you want to have a long lens for telephoto, for wildlife and elsewhere, but you also want to have low noise. Now you're stuck carrying around like a 70-200 or 100-400 2.8, or buying these giant lenses because we're butting heads against the physics of it all. If you want more light, you need more glass. That's not the case anymore, right? Through math and engineering, we can get the shallow depth of field without getting a 2.8 lens. We can get the noise removal reduction through stacking multiple images, or the noise reduction on the back end, which we're going to get into the next presentation on, so that you don't necessarily have to have that larger sensor, because the larger the sensor, the more light you have to project on from the back of the glass onto the sensor. So the larger the sensor, the larger the lens is. So now we're getting to the point where we can get away with smaller sensors. And you notice that trend from the very beginning, right? Everything's trying to get smaller and lighter and faster, right? And we can continue that, but we hit a point where like the physics prevent us from doing this in the traditional manner. Because the smaller the sensor, we do get less noise. We can only cram so many megapixels in there. Now we get around it. We can up-res images on the back end. We can remove noise after the fact. We can change the depth of field to anything we want afterwards. It's no longer a limitation. It's almost an advantage. And the iPhone's perfectly poised for this, as is Micro Four Thirds, by the way, when we get into an interchangeable lens camera, because it can take advantage of all the computational photography that lets us get around the physics aspect of it and really bring us into like the next era of photography. And case in point, even the Apple Vision that we were just showing you, where you can literally feel your photos for the first time. It's the craziest experience, and I can't even convey that properly through this right now. But like the iPhone is the only camera in the world that can take these VR videos right now, these immersive videos. And that's something to consider, right? It's the only like consumer available camera that can do this at the moment. So it's always going to be up to speed, and basically any camera that's going to sell to the largest audience is going to do this. But all the new technology is not going to be through larger glass and larger sensors now, as much as they want to convince us they are. It's going to be through physics. It's going to be through math. It's going to be through algorithms. It's going to be through software.
And I want to just propose something like maybe camera systems change and they are like goggles. Like, what about in the future? We're not carrying around this small box with the lens attached to it. Maybe it'll just be something we have implanted in our eye and we blink a certain way.
The eye,
The
It's going to be like
eye,
Ready
the
Player
eye
One.
camera. Yeah. Well, this
Well,
is a camera, by the way. There's a shutter on the top left. I felt ridiculous, but we were in this old fishing museum and I'm walking around. I felt like such a dum-dum. But I'm like walking around taking photos with the Apple Vision. Like it should have been a meme out there. But the photos that it took, it's pretty incredible,
it's
I have to
incredible.
say.
So I feel like maybe even the way we're making pictures and we experience them are going to change drastically with this invention and with the ones to come. Because once
yeah.
you experience your photos in 3 dimensions, like why do you want to experience it in two?
Yeah, we're just gotten so used to. Well, of course the photo is 2 dimensions. Let us show you how to get around it through compression, through expansion of space in a wide angle lens, and relative sizes and all that. But like, think about it. We don't have to be constrained by those limitations anymore, right?
Yeah.
Anything is possible, and that's what this technology really brings to us as creatives, is that freedom of thought of, well, anything is possible, like the drone. Anything is possible. It wouldn't occur to me to think about what the beach we just photographed earlier today looks from 100 feet above, looking straight down, what it looks like above the trees to the left, what it looks like from over the water looking back. We can think about these things, and all of a sudden we have a device that triggers this inspiration. I didn't sleep for like 2 nights when I got the Apple Vision, so I was like, oh my God, the possibilities. That's what this is all about. The technology is not supposed to just make it easier for you, more convenient or faster or lighter. That's nice, but that's not like the point of this. The point of this is to allow us to do things that weren't possible. And even more than that is to allow our mind to run wild with creative possibilities, and then have the technology to achieve that vision. But the technology not just allows us to achieve it, it enables us in some degree to have it in the first place, to think about it. What would it look like in color when everyone's shooting black and white? What would it look like in 3 dimensions when everyone's shooting two? What would it look like from over there looking back when everyone else is stuck with like the creative limitations that they place on themselves of where my feet need to be planted in order to get this photo. This enables the pure creative like power and genius that I think does exist in most people, and it lets that run wild. And that's what this is all about. Right. So for me, the camera of the future, if I had a dream, and we had a discussion about whether we want to start the presentation with this or not, is like, and we talked about a lot of these topics, right? I want dynamic range. I want the dynamic range to match what we can have with our eyes. So we don't need HDR because HDR only works when the subject is static. I want to just be able to capture all the detail in the shadows and all the detail in the highlights and have sensors that are totally new technology, right? I don't have to worry about the highlights blowing out while I'm trying to expose long enough for the shadow detail, which is why we have HDRs in the first place. I want local dimming sensors, right? If we're going to get specific, I want local dimming sensors that recognize that, stop the exposure on the parts where the highlights are blown out, just so it gets the most amount of light without overexposing, and then keep the other pixels open so we can get all the shadow details in a single exposure, right? We shouldn't have to worry about the contrast range of the scene and compare that to the contrast range and the capabilities of the sensor and try and match the two. It should just work,
So
right?
you want the human eye. You want the human eye.
Yeah.
I want the human eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want a camera that I
I-
don't have to like lug around and worry about the batteries. I want an ISO, I want a camera that goes down to like the human eye to ISO 1.
I've
where we
obviously
don't
never
need
shot on
any
this.
filters.
That's the future.
That would be
I,
crazy, right?
I had it
I
here.
want a lower ISO, so we don't need ND filters anymore. Like we don't need more megapixels. We need more dynamic range. Like these are the things that photographers really need,
Yeah.
right? We don't need larger sensors. We need better sensors. We need sensors with a lower ISO. We need sensors with more dynamic range. We need global shutters that allow us to do a sync speed. So we can carry one flash with us that's like a 200 watt second rather than carrying a 1600 watt second flash because we need to overpower the sun at a 250th sync speed on our shutter, right? This is real technology that would make an impact on the everyday life of photographers when we have global shutters, when we have ISO 1 or ISO 10 even, I'd be okay with,
Mhm.
to have that dynamic range.
And being a
Uh,
Lightroom person, you would love Fred's suggestion of keywording. Wouldn't it be
Oh,
nice if we had a
oh,
little
yeah.
little AI
Yeah.
version of like you take a picture and it
Yeah.
embeds keywords just based on AI?
Yeah, right? It says got object recognition. Oh yeah, prove it.
Yeah. Or
What am
like
I
the early digital cameras. Remember when it had the option to leave a little audio note? You would take a
Oh,
picture
yeah,
and you could leave.
exactly. Oh, that's what
Yeah,
I'm thinking.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ability for sound. Like imagine you when we have these 3D cameras where you could experience sound, you could experience the way you're feeling, you could experience the feeling of the sun hitting you. I mean,
And sound, by the way, the new Apple Vision Pro has this. It's spatial audio. And so sound, it turns out, has a stereo signal just like our images, and it's that visceral. It's that visceral because
Hmm.
there's a temporal element, right? When it sounds something to the right, it hits your right ear or it hits the left ear. And the distance of your ears is calibrated to the microphone. So it really feels like you're in that space, and the sound will ground you in a photo. And if you don't believe me, the importance of sound, just try watching a movie without the audio for more than a minute, right? It's everything when you experience something. We're talking about experiencing our photos, not just seeing them.
There you
And I
go.
think there's a lot of room for improvement still. I think the auto ISO, there's room for improvement. So right now we have to choose an auto ISO that's either um, for freezing motion, right? So for sports, for action. So we have a minimum shutter speed that we can dial in, but it's static,
And there's
right?
never any brain to the auto ISO. It always just like why
Exactly.
every time you're like, why did my camera choose that? Why wouldn't it choose this?
Yeah.
Makes more
Right.
sense.
So the other auto ISO is just recognizing like what the focal length is for static scenes. So when I set up cameras for my students, I have to do two scenarios, custom function 1 and 2. One for static scenes, where the auto ISO is allowing for the image stabilization, right? So 1/50th for a 50mm lens, and then compensate 3 or 4 stops, and it will vary. Or motion 2, because there's motion in the scene, and now it's a minimum shutter speed. But the thing is, we have focus tracking, we have object AI, right? We have recognition of the distance of an object already from the focal length standpoint. The second that we tie in focal length tracking with object AI and auto ISO, now if you're capturing that monkey jumping, it's going to recognize that it's moving and freeze the motion. And when it lands and it stops, that auto ISO minimum shutter speed should ramp down as it recognizes the object, your focal point where your focus is on, is now static. So it will recognize the speed and the distance of the focal point and tie that into auto ISO so that we only have one setting. And my ideal camera, like if I was going to sum it all up, would just be just something with one button, just the shutter.
Hmm.
That's it. And let me override it when I need to, right? But get out of my way and let me focus on my vision rather than like what I want to say, not just how I say it. And everything should be in service of that. And the most properly advanced cameras should be the one with the least amount of controls and buttons and dials. Because for me, that's just a lack of real engineering, right? It should be
It's
simple.
here.
Perfection
It's
is
waiting for you, Cliff.
What's that?
One button. It's one button.
Well,
You
what camera do
wanted
we have
it?
right now that has one button? Or beyond that, no buttons. It's the phone.
Yeah.
It's the phone.
Yeah. No,
The
that's
camera, you
it.
can press one button and it'll take a like 9 pictures, blend them into a multi-format HDR 48 megapixel raw file, ProRAW file, and then remove the noise, enhance every pixel on a pixel by pixel level at the speed of over 3 or 4 trillion operations per second, and deliver that to you on the world's best HDR screen. And that all happens, and then back it up in real time and be able to deliver it and even re-edit the file. All that happens with the press of one button.
One button.
Yeah,
There you
love that.
go. Well, we'll see where the future goes. I want to send a shout out to there's one person out there that I know still has a DSLR and has probably punched their computer screen 5 times in the past hour and change. Manual focus. We don't need auto ISO. Just set your ISO. There's somebody's losing their mind out there. So whoever you are, I see you. I know you're out there watching, but it's the future, baby. This is it. Like, if you don't want to use it, don't use it. But for those of us that want to take advantage of it, it allows us the space, the creative capacity to take our businesses, our passions in new directions. So
I totally agree. I totally agree. And for those people, because I know we didn't hear from everybody, like we want to hear from you. I genuinely think there's so
there
many
you go.
I have a whole long list of things I'd love to see in a future camera, and I'll let you guys know. But we're gonna list those, and I want to hear from you. I genuinely like we just for this platform actually launched today. You can use the QR code
You broke up off.
stuff.
You broke up on us there.
Can you hear
We
us?
have now we can hear you. You have the QR code up on the screen, so
Yeah.
for people
Like,
to
let us know.
I wanted to see whatever, because maybe together.
Yeah, we'll manifest it, but we have to hear from you guys. This is a great way to interact and let us know your comments off. What else you want to hear from us?
there you go. Well, look, we're gonna leave that up on the screen as we close this out. If you guys want to take a screen grab, hold your phone up there. We will, of course, have this on YouTube with the rest of our live content that we leave up there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are going to be back March 12th for the future of photo
Correct.
editing.
Yes.
We will.
All right. All right. Good. My sources were correct.
The
There
future
we
of
go.
that's going to be a roller coaster. So stay tuned and strap in for that one.
There we go. And I'm going to throw, because I do want to, we've had you guys on. I want to be respectful of your time, but keep this in the bank, because Lolita did get a question in as far as, do you see Sony as still leading the way in terms of technological advances in cameras? A loaded question. Maybe we could weave that in to next week.
I can answer that right now. And a simple answer,
Go
yes.
for it. There you go.
It would be yes, because they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They have more capital, more resources than any of the other camera companies. They've moved faster than anyone else. And they're the only camera company, this is interesting, that's developed every vertical of camera technology. They're the only camera company that has mobile devices, right? Canon, Nikon, Fuji, they're not making phones. Sony is. They make the world's most advanced point and shoot camera, right? They make the super zooms. They make APS-C size cameras. They make full frame cameras. They even make drones. Look this up, right? So they have every vertical, and they're the only company that's developing software at the same time for these devices, right? And they have all the screen technology, and they have the resources. So if there's a camera I would put my money on, yeah, it'd be Sony. It'd be a very easy decision.
There you go. Well, we'll see you guys in about a month. Yeah, a month from today.
In a month.
March 12th, we'll have you back. The future of
for
photo
sure.
editing. Huge thank you to you guys for taking time out of those beautiful surroundings to
Mhm.
share your knowledge and experience with us, and to all of our viewers out there, even the ones who are angry punching their screens. We appreciate you guys watching as always, and we'll see you on another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space next time. Take care, everyone.
I guess.